a cemetery caretaker takes a job to bury remains at an abandoned rural property. After the task, strange dreams and a mysterious figure begin to haunt him. By confronting the presence and giving the remains a proper farewell, he finds peace. A story about respect for the dead and the silences they carry. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications for more soul-stirring stories. Good evening. My name is Juarez, and for nearly 20 years, I worked as a caretaker at a small cemetery in a forgotten town, nestled among dry hills and dirt paths few dared to tread. It was such an isolated place it seemed to exist only on old maps, where people lived quietly, as if afraid to awaken something dormant. It's not a job that sparks admiration or lively bar conversations. When I mentioned my work, people changed the subject, or looked at me with a mix of curiosity and unease. But for me, it was just what I knew how to do. The cemetery provided enough to pay the bills, buy food, and keep my old pickup truck running. Over time, I learned to respect what cannot be seen, not just the dead beneath the earth, but the silences they carry, the echoes of stories no one tells. Working at the cemetery wasn't just digging graves or cleaning moss-covered tombstones. It was dealing with the weight of what's left behind. Sometimes, I felt the air grow heavier in certain corners, as if someone were still there, watching. It wasn't fear, but a kind of reverence. My grandmother, who raised me after my mother passed, used to say the dead don't like to be forgotten, but they also don't like to be disturbed. "Give them respect, Juarez," she'd repeat, "and they'll leave you in peace." I took it seriously, but I never imagined a job outside the cemetery would make me question what I believed. What I'm about to tell didn't happen among the cemetery's graves, but during an extra job I took, one of those that come up now and then and pay well enough to avoid too many questions. Some people sought me out for discreet tasks, burying objects found on vacant lots, disposing of old remains, or hiding things that shouldn't be seen. I didn't think it was wrong, though I knew others might disagree. It was just a way to survive, like any other. Once, a middle-aged man named Don Ramiro found me through someone whose name I've forgotten. He was short, with deep wrinkles, and eyes that seemed to hold a secret. He said he'd bought an abandoned rural property, a plot overgrown with tall weeds and the rubble of a house that collapsed decades ago. While a mason cleared the land for new construction, they found things that shouldn't be exposed. "Their remains, Juarez," he said in a low voice, as if afraid of being overheard. "I want them buried with respect. No fuss, no gossip in the town." He looked at me firmly, ensuring I understood. I thought it over before agreeing. It wasn't my first time doing something like this, and the extra money would help. My truck needed new tires, and the electric bills didn't wait. Don Ramiro gave me half the payment up front, a wad of bills wrapped in cloth. He asked me to bring a shovel, lime, and a sturdy bag, and we agreed to meet late the next afternoon, before nightfall. "No talking to anyone," he emphasized, his tone leaving no room for doubt. "It's better for everyone." On the agreed day, I packed my things and drove down a bumpy dirt road, about 20 minutes past where the pavement ended. The sun was low, painting the sky a pale orange that seemed to hesitate before fading. The property was in an isolated area where the silence was so vast it swallowed all sound. No birds sang, no dogs barked, no distant murmur of people working, just dry earth, tall weeds, sparse trees with twisted branches, and a broken wire fence that served no purpose. It felt like a place where time had stopped, as if life had given up on being there. I parked near a pile of stones that might have been the remains of the old house. I found Don Ramiro under the shade of a dry tree, a black bag at his feet. He seemed tenser than the day before, hands restless, eyes scanning the horizon. He said little, just pointed to a spot away from the ruins. "There," he muttered. "Do it right." I grabbed the shovel and started digging. The ground was hard, as if it had never been touched. Each strike of the shovel made my arms shake, and the late afternoon heat glued my shirt to my back. Don Ramiro stayed nearby but didn't help. He just watched, arms crossed, as if waiting for something beyond the hole. It took nearly an hour to dig deep enough. When I finished, he placed the bag at the bottom. I didn't look too closely. Something about how he handled it, with too much care, made me feel it was better not to know what was inside. I spread the lime as he asked, covered it with dirt, and we tamped the ground flat. The sun had set, and the dim twilight made the place feel even emptier. Don Ramiro handed me the rest of the money, a handful of crumpled bills. "Don't tell anyone, Juarez," he said, staring at me with heavy eyes. "No need to scare people, right?" I nodded, got in my truck and left. For me, it was just another job. Easy money, no questions. But that night, something changed. I dreamed of a long dirt path flanked by gnarled trees that seemed to whisper in a language I couldn't understand. The sky in the dream was gray, heavy, as if a storm was about to break, but there was no wind. Far ahead, a small figure stood with its back to me, waiting. I can't explain why, but I felt a chill in my chest, a certainty I shouldn't approach. I woke up sweating, every detail of the dream etched in my mind, which wasn't usual for me. I tried to brush it off as exhaustion, but an unease lingered. The next day, while shopping at the town market, I noticed something odd. Near my house's gate, in the packed dirt, were small footprints, like those of worn-out shoes, almost childlike. There were no kids around, and the nearest neighbors lived half a kilometer away. I thought it might be someone passing by out of curiosity, but the way the footprints were perfectly aligned made me uneasy. I returned home feeling watched, though I saw nothing but the shadows of trees swaying in the wind. At the cemetery during my shift, things got worse. While sweeping the path between graves near the back wall where the weeds grew tallest, I saw a figure in the distance. It was small, standing with its back to me between two broken tombstones. I blinked, thinking it was my tired eyes or the sunlight playing tricks, but it didn't vanish. I approached cautiously, gripping the broom harder than necessary. "Hey, who's there?" I called, but there was no answer. The figure didn't move. I remembered the dream and felt a shiver but kept going. When I reached the spot, no one was there. No footprints, no broken branches, just the heavy silence of the cemetery. I tried to convince myself it was my imagination, but the next day, it was there again, near the oldest graves, always with its back turned, always still. I shouted again, but nothing. When I got close, it vanished, as if the air had swallowed it. From then on, sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. Nights felt endless, and I stayed awake staring at the ceiling, afraid to close my eyes and return to that dirt path. Every time I looked out the window, I swore something moved in the dark, a shadow I couldn't explain, a shape that vanished when I tried to focus. I told no one. In the town, people already saw me as the cemetery man, and I didn't want them thinking I was crazy. But one night, around 3 in the morning, I heard soft noises near the back gate, like footsteps dragging in the dirt. I got up without even putting on slippers, grabbed a flashlight, and peeked out the window. There it was, a small figure, standing a few meters away, like a colorless shadow. It didn't speak or move, just stood there, as if waiting for something from me. I closed the curtain carefully, turned off the light and stayed silent, heart pounding. I didn't call the police. What would I say? There's a shadow in my yard? I stayed up all night, sitting in a chair, waiting for dawn. When morning came, I checked outside. The same small footprints were there, aligned, as if someone had walked slowly. It wasn't normal. I started feeling that presence everywhere. I didn't see it clearly, but it was there, a weight in the air, a sense of being followed. The dreams returned, but now I was in the cemetery, surrounded by withered trees and crooked tombstones. The figure stood in the distance, always with its back to me, always waiting. I woke up exhausted, as if I'd spent the night digging instead of sleeping. I tried to find Don Ramiro. I called the number he gave me, but it went straight to voicemail. I decided to go back to the property, unsure what I'd find. The place looked even more abandoned than before. The weeds were taller, the ruins dustier, as if no one had touched the land since that day. The hole we'd dug was barely visible, as if the earth had swallowed it. I asked the nearest neighbors, an elderly couple living a few kilometers away. They shook their heads, confused. "That land's been empty for years," the woman said. "No one's bought anything around here." The man just shrugged, as if I were talking about a cursed place. I returned home feeling I'd gotten involved in something much bigger than I realized. My health began to falter. I lost my appetite, felt an unexplained exhaustion, and tripped in the cemetery, bruising my knee on a broken tombstone. My co-workers, who usually teased me about my quiet nature, noticed something was off. "You okay, Juarez?" Old Manuel, who watched the gate, would ask. I just nodded, giving no details. How could I explain seeing that figure? Everywhere? Once, waiting for the bus on the road, I saw it across the street, leaning against a pole, motionless. People passed by without noticing, as if it didn't exist. Another night, while washing dishes, I saw a reflection in the window, a shadow crossing the hallway without opening doors. I started keeping the radio on to drown out the silence, but slept on the couch with the light on, afraid to close my eyes. The dreams got worse. The figure was closer now, so close I could see the outline of its short, disheveled hair. I felt dread, but also a strange curiosity. Did it want something? Had I done something wrong? I went to the town's church, a small building with peeling walls and a feeble bell. I told a woman named Dona Inés, who helped with masses, a vague version of my story. She listened silently, her look a mix of pity and concern. "I'll bless your house," she said without asking much. I accepted, unsure what else to do. She came with a bottle of holy water, prayed in the corners, and sprinkled drops that glinted in the dim light. She gave me a wooden rosary to hang on the door. "Pray, Juarez," she said, "and don't fear what you don't understand." That night, nothing happened. But at dawn, the rosary was on the floor, broken, its beads scattered with a bit of dirt beside them, as if someone had stepped there. That week, I started running a low fever and felt pains like needles through my body. I went to the clinic, but the doctor's pills did nothing. In my dreams, the figure was so close it almost turned to face me. I felt a mix of fear and fascination, as if seeing its face would change everything. One night, I woke with the certainty it was in my room. It stood there, staring at the wall, silent. It wasn't a vague shadow. It was a defined shape, small, with hunched shoulders. I lay frozen in bed, trying to stay calm. I didn't turn on the light or move. I waited until dawn, heart in my throat. When the room brightened, it was gone, as if it had never been there. I realized praying or ignoring it wasn't enough. I had to return to the property. Something was unresolved, something I'd helped bury without knowing. I grabbed my shovel, a water bottle, and a metal crucifix my grandmother left me, stored in a wooden box since her death. I drove to the property down the same bumpy road. The place hadn't changed. Dry weeds, fallen fence, air still as if time had forgotten it. I parked near where we'd dug. Without thinking much, I started digging in the same spot. As if an invisible force guided the shovel, I wasn't afraid, just determined, like I knew I had to fix this. After a while, the shovel hit something that wasn't stone or root. I knelt and saw an old cloth, dirty with earth, wrapped around something. As I brushed it off, I realized it was human remains, still with bits of moldy clothing. My chest tightened, and my breath grew short. I heard slow footsteps behind me, carefully treading the dirt. I turned and saw the figure. For the first time, it faced me. A young woman with tired eyes, carrying an eternal sadness. Her skin was pale, her eyes sunken, as if bearing the weight of years she hadn't lived. I didn't know if she felt anger or pain. I stood still, trying to understand. I didn't want to run. It seemed she just wanted me to know she was there. I understood that hurried burial hadn't been the closure she needed. Calmly, I spread the lime, covered the remains, and placed the crucifix on top. I said a few quiet words, asking her to rest. I didn't know how to pray properly, but I thought it was better than nothing. I felt she wasn't vengeful, just seeking peace. When I finished, I looked at her. She was still there, but her gaze was lighter, as if something had been resolved. I filled the hole carefully and smoothed the earth. The silence now felt different, calmer, as if the air could breathe again. I sat for a moment, breathing deeply, trying to process it all. The sun was low again, and the trees' shadows stretched across the ground. When I stood, she was gone. I drove back, glancing in the rearview mirror, but no one was there. I got home relieved, without that strange weight that had followed me. In the days that followed, the dreams stopped, and I no longer felt that presence. My appetite returned, and I could work at the cemetery without constantly looking over my shoulder. My co-workers noticed I seemed lighter. "You look like you finally slept well after years," Manuel teased. I smiled but didn't say much. Everyone deals with these things their own way. After that, I learned that burying someone isn't just covering bones with dirt. It's an act of respect, of acknowledgement. Maybe that woman just needed a proper farewell she hadn't had before. I was the instrument of that by chance, and I realized that sometimes, to give someone peace, you have to leave a piece of yourself in the process. The cemetery, with its silences and shadows, taught me that the dead don't ask for much, just not to be forgotten.